Now we're going to talk a little bit about writing and crafting your story. This will mostly benefit those of you who haven't written anything, but if you have, hopefully you'll learn some tips and tricks to apply to your writing. How do you get started? For me, it was reading, and I found a site to read on, and it inspired me, and eventually I got up the courage to post my own writing, and the feedback was so addictive, I kept writing and kept growing in my craft. You'll soon start to see patterns in what you like to read. If you are buying a lot of dragon books, then I would suggest start writing a story with dragons. If you are enjoying reading stories with strong female characters, then I would suggest starting with a strong female lead. So what you read is generally a good reflection of what you would like to write. It's important not to copy stories that you've read. So if you read a story like, for instance, Twilight, and you really like it, it's good to think about what it is you liked about that story. Did you like that there was a mix of paranormal and normal characters? Did you like that it was romantic? So start thinking about what it was that you like about those stories and find your own twist to them. Take, for instance, the story Twilight again. One of my own stories was inspired by that. I was thinking what it was about vampires that was so popular at the time, but I didn't want to write a vampire. So I ended up writing a story about a young mermaid girl who could turn any boy she kisses into a merman. So that kind of was inspired by Twilight and the vampire bite making somebody a vampire, and I made my own unique spin on a story from that. Sometimes you read things and it's what's lacking that inspires you. For instance, when I first started really getting into reading and writing, I was reading a lot of stories that had really weak female protagonists. So it inspired me to write strong, independent women in my books. And that's something that's kind of kept with me through the course of my writing. Once you have your story inspiration, the next step is to decide whether you're a plotter or a pantser. What a pantser is it's somebody who writes by the seat of their pants. And what a plotter is somebody who outlines the whole story and all the details before they even start writing. A lot of people have no clue what they are. So I have a really good question that kind of will help you decide if you're a plotter or a pantser. When you are faced with a major life decision, do you write a list of pros and cons? Do you think about all the potential outcomes to come up with your solution? Or do you trust your gut instinct and go with what your gut's telling you to do? If you are a planner, you're most likely a plotter, and if you trust your gut instinct, you're most likely a pantser. But what I encourage all the pantsers out there to do is to learn how to plot, to understand the different structures to story so that you can apply those while you're pantsing. It will help you in the long run when you're going back to edit, because pantsers are often faced with a lot of editing when they're done their first draft. The 5 basics that you need to consider anytime you're plotting your book is exposition, rising action, climax, falling action, and resolution. So on the graph, you can see that the exposition is a flat line. It doesn't mean it has to be boring. You have to somehow keep us interested in the everyday life of the character. This is the part of the book where you're hooking readers. So it still has to be interesting enough to hook them, to keep them reading until it gets to the rising action. So you can see there's a dip between exposition and rising action. This is usually where the first conflict takes place, or the moment something happens that your character can no longer stay in their normal life. So you can see the graph goes up, and it goes up really quick and sharp. So the rising action is the part of the story where all the bad things that could possibly happen to your character happen, one after another. And when you get into the deeper, more detailed plots, like the arch plot or the hero's journey, it will talk you through the different internal and external challenges your characters have to face in this section. So when you get to the climax, you can see it's the very peak of the graph. That's because it's the peak of your story, when all the things should make sense and all the things should come together, and where the biggest challenges should be faced. From the climax, the story starts dipping downwards again. This is where we transition back into the everyday life, or what everyday life will look like for your character after the story wraps up. You start closing all the loose ends that you opened in rising action so that we can lead up to a really good closure and a grand finale in the resolution phase. So when you get to the resolution phase, see how the falling action dips back into the resolution. Usually there's another decision your character has to make there that will then determine what will go on and what their new ordinary life will look like. For those of you who have more experience with your writing and are already familiar with the 5 points of story structure, I really strongly encourage you to take a deeper look at the hero's journey and the arch plot. Those have been developed over the years from novelists and screenwriters that have come before you. It's also a really good tool to use if you already have a finished manuscript. It's good to see if your current manuscript has all the same plot points or reaches all the plot points that are mentioned in those 2 plot techniques. The arch plot and the hero's journey are very similar in the sense where the hero's journey actually lives inside of the arch plot. So they're not three completely different ways of looking at a story, just a little bit more complex as you go along. So it kind of goes the 5-stage story structure that I walked you through. Then perhaps you would go to the hero's journey for the next stage of complexity, and then the arch plot. Typically, I do a combination of plotting and pantsing, and part of the reason that is because I serialize most of my novels online, and I take feedback from my readers and I apply that to my future writing. So what I do before I sit down to start any story, I come up with the 5 key parts of my story. I know all those main points before I start a story, and then I let my characters kind of direct me in between the two. And the reason I do that, and I more freely write in between all my main plot points, is because, like I said, I let my readers influence. And recently I did something really fun, and I let my readers vote on different plot points. That was kind of fun for me as a writer because it was a challenge to write to their expectation. It was challenging me outside of my normal system of writing, and it was really fun. It was fun to give the readers what they wanted and kind of put a new, unique twist on that. Oftentimes, you may encounter something called writer's block, the dreaded WB. What happens when you have writer's block? How do you push through? How do you continue? Well, the first thing I would suggest is to try to identify why you have it. Is it because you're feeling insecure about your writing or where you're going with the plotting of your story? Is it because you have no clue what to do, you wrote yourself into a corner and you don't know how to get out? If those are the cases, then I would suggest taking a little bit of a creative break from your story and reading other stories, writing other pieces of work. If you're just worried about your writing not being good enough, my suggestion is to keep writing and pressing through, because it's much easier to go back and edit and improve bad writing than it is to go back and edit and improve no writing at all. Either press through or give yourself a creative distraction, because a lot of times you'll come up with the answer you're looking for in the first place. For me personally, because I write multiple projects at a time, and because some of them are plotted and some of them are pantsed, what I usually do is I set aside a day or 2 a week to work on my serialized online novels. Just before I start writing, I'll read back through a couple of the chapters that have already been posted, and then I'll free write forward, keeping into consideration what my next plot point coming up will be, and what my characters' natural reactions to things will be, and also what my readers' expectations and hopes for them to be. So I take all those into consideration when I'm free writing, and then the rest of the week I focus and work on the stories that I'm plotting in hopes of getting traditionally published.